Hello everybody, welcome back. We're going to be beginning a series of videos on the topic of combinatorics, which mainly deals with permutations and combinations. Where this lesson tends to start is here with a multiplication law or a multiplication principle example. This is sort of what most of the topic hinges on. So whilst this exact example of like networks or pathways isn't super key to the foundational knowledge of the course, this stuff on how multiplication law interacts with our maths is really important, okay? And we also have a bit of addition law or addition principle here as well. So multiplication law, in essence, is if I have, let's say I have three ways, like I have here, right? I have three ways. So multiplication law, multiplication principle, in essence, is if I've got, let's say, three ways to do something and, keyword being and, two ways to do something else, I have three multiplied by two ways to do that. I know my hands are backwards, it's a bit annoying, sorry. I'll get used to the mirroring at some point. But I have basically three times two ways to, or options, three times two options, I guess, or ways to go about completing a task. That is the key to multiplication law. The key word for multiplication law is the word and. The key word for our addition law is the word or. So let's have a look. I want to figure out how many paths there are traveling from A to E if we go left to right. And the idea here is if I just look, I've got two original choices. I can go up or I can go down. Now, because I use the word or, this basically means I'm going to take all the options if I go up. I'm going to add that to all the options if I choose sort of the bottom path from A to C. So if I go through the top path, I have three ways to go from A to B. And, keyword being and, I have two ways to go from B to E. So I've got three ways here. Let me get rid of this first line so it looks a little bit cleaner. I've got three ways here and I've got two ways here. Okay, so to figure out the number of options going from A to E, I guess I could write via B because they're going through B. I would have 3 multiplied by 2, which would equal 6 different ways I can get from point A to point E if I go the top path. It's the exact same logic going through the bottom. So if I look at going from A to C, well, I've got one way to go from A to C. So I've got one way to go from here to here, and I have two ways to go from here to here, and I have one way to go from D to E. So that means I've got, I'll change my color, I'll probably choose blue. I've got one way here, I've got two ways here, I've got one way over here. So if I'm going from A to E via C and D, then I've got one way and two ways and one way left, which means I have a total of two ways to go from A to E via C and D. Okay, so because I can go up or I can go down, I now basically combine my two results. So total paths is simply going to be 6 plus 2, which is going to equal 8 different options in total. Okay, so look, the networking stuff tends to confuse people. I chose like the example that I think in many ways looks the most complicated, but it's meant to just highlight in pure essence both addition and multiplication law, how I can find my different ways, my different options to do something. This is sort of a key idea when we start to about permutations and combinations. We start to about how we can add these two things together. We talk about normally, you know, 3 ways and 2 ways would be 3 times 2, which can be 6 different ways, for example, going through the top path. So hopefully that makes sense. We will do a bunch more of this that are very practical, very rooted in exam style questions. So if this first example isn't crystal clear, I think that's largely okay. As long as we get the basic idea of I've got 3 choices and 2 choices, that means it's 3 times 2 for the first option, the path in yellow. That's the main takeaway for today's lesson or for today's video. And I hope you guys enjoyed. Any questions, feel free to comment that down below and I'll see you guys in the next one.